This is the Legal Breakdown. I'm here with former federal prosecutor Glenn Kirshner. Glenn, the Trump Organization was just found guilty on all counts in the New York DA's tax fraud case against the Trump Org. What does this mean for the Trump Organization moving forward?
It means that the Trump Organization may very well go belly up, not as a direct result of this verdict, because the district attorney brought these criminal charges against the Trump Organization, and they are only seeking $1.6 million in fines and penalties. So it's not the financial hit that may cause the Trump Organization to go belly up. I think it's the collateral consequences. First of all, once a business, a corporation, an organization is found guilty of 17 crimes, of a number of felony offenses, no reputable lender is going to want to do business with the Trump Organization moving forward. Even the less than reputable lenders, which sometimes it seems have done business with Donald Trump or the Trump Organization, some of these overseas banks or lenders, I don't think they are going to feel like they can still get the bang for their buck lending money to a bad risk like Donald Trump or the Trump Organization. So I think it's the collateral consequences of the conviction and not necessarily the direct consequences of this conviction that will hurt the Trump Organization the most.
Why wasn't Donald Trump a defendant in this case? Because even prosecutors have said that, quote, evidence shows that Trump explicitly okayed the tax fraud. So why wasn't he involved? Why is this just focusing on the Trump Org itself?
So, Brian, there's no good answer to that question. There are some bad answers. Let me give you one. If you'll recall, some months ago, there was a team of prosecutors that they were investigating Trump for possible crimes in connection with the investigation of the Trump Organization, the investigation of Trump's chief financial officer, Alan Weisselberg. And that team of prosecutors, led by Mark Pomerantz, a former federal prosecutor and a really experienced public corruption and white-collar crime prosecutor and defense attorney, made the recommendation to Alvin Bragg, not long after Alvin Bragg was elected district attorney for Manhattan. And he said, look, Mr. District Attorney, we've got enough evidence to indict Donald Trump, and we've got enough evidence to convict him. And for whatever reason, Alvin Bragg killed the investigation into Trump and would not give them permission to seek an indictment. Only they could prosecute the organization. They could prosecute Alan Weisselberg. So I wish I had a good answer, Brian, to why wasn't Donald Trump included in this criminal trial? Because it's all the curiouser when you realize that late last week, in their closing arguments to the jury in the Trump Organization case, the prosecutor argued the following: ladies and gentlemen, the evidence introduced during the course of this trial against the Trump Organization makes it clear that Donald Trump explicitly approved of tax fraud. Well, if you've got that kind of evidence and you can make that kind of argument to a jury, why in the world wasn't Donald Trump included as a defendant? I hope that the prosecutor's comments to the jury last week provide foreshadowing for the criminal indictments to come.
And do we have any indication from Alvin Bragg's office in the New York DA that they will be reopening any investigation so that they can actually because it's not like the Trump Org is just some nebulous thing. I mean, there are people running this, and if they already have that proof that Donald Trump was the one that was okaying all this stuff for which the Trump Organization was just found guilty, it would seem, it would make sense that they would then move forward with reopening that case.
Yeah, these crimes were clearly, if not at the direction of Donald Trump, he knew about them, he sanctioned them, and he benefited from them, probably personally, as did his organization. Here's the good news. A couple of days ago, it was reported that Alvin Bragg has hired yet another prosecutor who actually comes from the Department of Justice. But before that, he was with New York Attorney General Tish James' office, and he investigated the Trump Organization previously. The reporting is that Alvin Bragg hired him to reinvigorate the criminal investigation into Donald Trump's possible violation of New York state laws. So I think that this trial, in a sense, may have served as a trial run, so to speak, to see if the next step should be to indict Donald Trump, because they didn't know how Alan Weisselberg's testimony was going to hold up. Apparently, the jury credited Alan Weisselberg's testimony that the Trump organization committed crimes. So, I think it was not a sure thing, and the prosecutors may have wanted to go first against the Trump organization, see how Alan Weisselberg held up as a cooperating witness, and now maybe the next logical step is to pursue charges against Trump himself.
About Don Jr. and Eric, because both of them were super vocal about, them taking over the Trump organization. Where is their liability in all of this?
So we don't know where their criminal liability is. We do know that Eric Trump, for example, was brought before the grand jury in connection with the Trump org investigation, and he reportedly pled the fifth, right? Invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination tons of times. So that tells me if somebody pleads the fifth, that means his truthful testimony would tend to incriminate him.
And because that was a criminal case, they can draw a negative inference from that, correct?
No, unfortunately, it's only in a civil case where a jury can draw a negative inference if you invoke the fifth. In a criminal case, you have an absolute Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. And when you invoke it, it can never be used against you in the setting of a criminal case. But remember, Tish James, the New York Attorney General, has brought suit against Donald Trump personally and Donald Trump's adult children. And whereas this verdict, this guilty verdict of the Trump organization, only carries with it up to a $1.6 million fine against the Trump org, Tish James is going for $250 million from Trump and his adult children. So Eric and Don Jr. and Ivanka are on the hook in that civil suit. Now, that will not land them in jail, but it may, take a deep bite out of their assets. And Tish James is also seeking to have them barred from serving on any corporate boards in the state of New York, which, again, will also make it difficult for the Trump brand to continue to do business.
Can you just expand on what we should expect to see from the Tish James New York AG's case and how it differs from the Trump Organization DA case that we just saw the results of?
So the main way it differs is there are allegations that Trump and his adult children were involved in a long-term, decade or more scheme of financial fraud, but nobody will go to jail. Not behind Tish James' case, even if she wins a jury verdict when that civil case proceeds to trial. What's at risk there is a whole bunch of money. Again, another nail in the coffin of the Trump organization, and they could be barred from doing corporate business in New York moving forward. So that is some of what is in play in the Tish James civil suit.
Would it lend itself to reason that because of the results that we found out in this latest case, that it would kind of lend itself to another favorable result in the Tish James case? Like if this was just proven in that case, if they were found guilty in that case, then doesn't that forebode something similar in the New York AG's case?
Yeah, it stands to reason, and if we apply common sense, they just proved that the Trump organization was guilty of 17 crimes, and they proved it beyond a reasonable doubt. That is the highest evidentiary burden known to the law. When Tish James goes to a civil trial, a civil suit against Trump and his adult children for the fraud that they were committing as part of the Trump organization, Tish James prosecutors or the attorneys that are handling that litigation only have to prove it by a preponderance of the evidence. That's 51%. That is considerably less than the standard for criminal conviction. So it absolutely stands to reason, if we apply our common sense, that Tish James will certainly be able to meet her legal burden of proof. But here's the other thing to know. What happens in one case in the trial court isn't precedent. It's not like you can use the guilty verdict of the Trump organization and introduce it into evidence at the civil trial against Trump and his adult children. It's not precedent, but what it does is it gives you a real atmospheric bump. It puts wind in your sails. because you know that a jury has already seen it the prosecution's way.
And what's the timeline on Tish James's case?
So I think it is still pending trial. I'm not sure if there is a trial date that is set. It may be that it's coming up in the spring or in the summer. I just haven't seen the specific trial date reported.
Okay, because now our appetites are whetted, and so it'd be nice to just keep riding this train forward. I do want to switch topics here, and that is to the January 6th committee. There's been reporting that the January 6th committee will be sending criminal referrals to the DOJ. Now, I know that these referrals aren't binding, but what is the significance of these referrals as far as the DOJ is concerned?
Yeah, so let's talk about what a criminal referral is and what it can accomplish and what it can't accomplish. So we know that the January 6th House Select Committee has done an extraordinary investigation into the attack on the U.S. Capitol, into the insurrection. They deposed or put under oath more than 1,000 witnesses. They subpoenaed countless documents and records. They have amassed a really impressive mountain of evidence about what happened on and around January 6th. Now they are in the final throes of their investigation. What does that look like? Well, they're assimilating all this information and evidence, frankly, for us, for the American people, and they're going to issue a report that sort of gives us all of the highlights and probably some of the lowlights of what they learned about the conduct of Donald Trump and any number of other folks. So the other thing that they have promised us, which I think is pretty remarkable, is that they are going to release to the public these 1,000+ transcripts. That's going to be an investigative reporter's dream once those transcripts are put into the public square, and we'll be able to assess the evidence for ourselves. Along with that, we just got the chairman of the committee, Representative Benny Thompson, saying that they will make criminal referrals to the Department of Justice. Now, a criminal referral is simply a suggestion. It's a recommendation from a co-equal branch of government that, hey, look, DOJ, we investigated this, expertly and exhaustively. We found evidence. I'm going to use Trump as an example. We found evidence that Donald Trump committed the following federal felonies, the following crimes against the United States. Here's the evidence. We are recommending that you conduct a criminal investigation and bring charges if you believe they're warranted. It's only a suggestion. It's only a recommendation. But boy, a recommendation doesn't get any more serious when you're dealing with the kind of democracy-busting crimes that Donald Trump and his criminal associates committed, that I think the J6 committee has now unearthed evidence of, documented, and will package up for the Department of Justice. But here's what we need to keep in mind. A criminal referral by Congress, by one co-equal branch of government to another, has been done before in the recent past, right? We know that Congress made criminal referrals of, for example, Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro for contempt of Congress. And what did DOJ do? They went with that recommendation and they indicted Bannon and Navarro. We also know that the J6 committee and the Congress as a whole made a criminal referral of Mark Meadows and Dan Scavino for precisely the same crime that they inarguably committed, contempt of Congress. What did DOJ do? Nothing. Crickets, yeah. Right? We don't have an indictment of those two men. Now, here's my hope, Brian. My hope is the reason we don't have an indictment, because they committed those crimes, is because DOJ is perhaps intending to roll them into a larger indictment, a conspiracy to commit offenses against or defraud the United States, what we call a 371 conspiracy. So I don't think DOJ is done with Mark Meadows and Dan Scavino. Here's the other thing, and just give me a minute because this one sticks in my craw. I hold on to this grudge long and hard. Back in 2019, the Senate Intel Committee, a bipartisan Senate Intel Committee, made criminal referrals to the Department of Justice of who? Don Jr., Jared Kushner, Steve Bannon, Eric Prince, and Sam Clovis, because the Senate Intel Committee believed those men lied in their testimony about all things Trump-Russia. So the Senate Intel Committee referred them for criminal investigation and possible prosecution. But who was the Attorney General at that time? Bill Barr. And Bill Barr's Department of Justice is where criminal referrals of Donald Trump's criminal associates and family members went to die. So nothing ever happened with those criminal referrals. So the point is, it's a mixed bag. It's only a recommendation, a very serious recommendation, but DOJ prides itself on making independent prosecutorial decisions. So I predict they will say, thank you very much, Congress. We'll take the evidence you're providing. We'll take it under advisement, but we will make our own independent prosecutorial judgment.
Great. Well, obviously a lot to keep our eyes on here between both the Trump Organization cases that continue to bear down and the January 6th cases as well. So with that said, if anybody watching wants to continue watching this series and getting more legal information, legal news as it comes up, definitely subscribe to both my channel and Glenn's channel. The links are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.